Good evening. Tonight, we examine one of the most audacious special operations of the modern conflict. A mission where 12 small drones carrying less than $5,000 in equipment challenged a defense network worth hundreds of millions and changed the course of a war. On the 30th of October, Moscow launched a devastating hypersonic missile assault against the Ukrainian capital. The strike package, valued at $200 million, included multiple Kinzhal missiles that tore through the city's defenses. One of these weapons found its target at a civilian maternity hospital, claiming 14 innocent lives in an instant. The world waited for Kiev's response, expecting another round of tit-for-tat strikes along the endless front lines. But Ukraine's military intelligence directorate had something far more calculated in mind. Their analysts had spent months studying Russia's fuel supply network, searching for the single point where maximum damage could be inflicted with minimal resources. They found it in the Koltsevoy pipeline, a critical artery that feeds jet fuel to air bases and armored divisions across 3 military districts. Intelligence reports confirmed that on a specific date, this pipeline would be filled to absolute capacity, 7 million tons of pressurized fuel moving through steel conduits at 1,000 pounds per square inch. The plan received its operational name, Serpent's Head, and the weapon of choice would be 12 first-person view drones, with a combined cost of $4,800. The challenge was daunting. These tiny aircraft would need to penetrate one of the most sophisticated air defense zones on the planet, a layered network anchored by S-400 systems capable of tracking 300 targets simultaneously. At 2:01 in the morning, local time, a KAMAZ military truck positioned in the Bryansk forest executed its mission. The roof retracted, and 12 drones lifted into the darkness. But this wasn't a simple swarm attack. The formation immediately split according to a pre-programmed tactical doctrine. 8 drones climbed to higher altitude, deliberately making themselves visible to Russian radar operators. These decoys began broadcasting electronic signatures designed to mimic Iranian-made Shahed drones, the kind that had become familiar threats to Russian air defenses. Their purpose was pure misdirection to consume the attention and resources of the enemy's tracking systems. Meanwhile, 4 attack drones dropped to terrain-hugging altitude, skimming just meters above the ground. These aircraft carried sophisticated countermeasures, onboard systems that began feeding false GPS data directly into Russian radar networks. To the technicians monitoring their screens hundreds of miles away, these drones appeared as nothing more threatening than a flock of migrating birds following natural flight patterns. Inside the KAMAZ truck, the Ukrainian operator watched dual displays, one showing the decoys successfully drawing fire, the other tracking the real strike force as it approached the target. The entire operation hinged on this moment of deception, exploiting the fact that Russia's pipeline was filled beyond normal capacity, turning their own infrastructure into a weapon against them. At 2:03, Russian forces launched their counterattack. A Panzer S-1 air defense system, positioned 12 miles from the drone formation, opened fire with devastating effect. Its twin 30mm cannons can deliver 4,000 rounds per minute, creating an almost impenetrable wall of steel in the sky. Within seconds, 2 decoy drones were obliterated, shredded by the sustained barrage before a surface-to-air missile finished the job. Inside a Russian command bunker, operators watched 2 hostile contacts vanish from their screens and marked it as a successful intercept. But they had just made a catastrophic tactical error. Every muzzle flash, every missile launch broadcast the exact GPS coordinates of the Panzer system to Ukrainian receivers. The Russians didn't just destroy 2 drones, they volunteered their position for targeting. At the same time, the main S-400 system was experiencing its own failure, though this one was by design. Its powerful radar arrays did detect the 4 low-flying attack drones, but the AI-driven classification system evaluated their flight characteristics, speed, altitude, and erratic movement patterns, and categorized them as biological clutter. The system's own sophisticated algorithms, designed to filter out false positives and prevent wasted ammunition on flocks of birds, simply ignored the genuine threat. Back in the KMAZ truck, a new icon appeared on the operator's display, a confirmed location for the Pantsir that had just revealed itself. The Russians believed they had scored a defensive victory. In reality, they had just painted a target on their own position. Inside the S-400 command center, the situation was rapidly deteriorating into chaos. The main tactical display showed a nightmare scenario: 8 high-altitude contacts, creating overlapping signatures and jamming patterns. The threat prioritization software, overwhelmed by the volume of apparent targets, began to lag. The commanding officer made a decision that seemed entirely logical, given the information available. He ordered his crews to focus all attention on the high-altitude group and to disregard the low-altitude contacts flagged as ground clutter. That single command sealed their fate. This was asymmetric warfare at its finest, a denial-of-service attack not against computers, but against human cognition. The S-400 system itself could theoretically track hundreds of objects simultaneously, but the human operators could only process and engage a handful at a time. By creating a loud, visually overwhelming problem in the sky, Ukraine forced Russian personnel to look upward, creating a fatal blind spot at ground level. In that blind spot, the 4 real attack drones were now less than 2 miles from the pipeline complex. An S-400 radar beam swept across them, and for a fraction of a second, their signatures registered on a technician's monitor. But just as quickly, they disappeared again. The filtering algorithm had done exactly what it was programmed to do, identifying small, low-flying objects with irregular flight paths and correctly classifying them as biological targets, not threats requiring engagement. This was the checkmate moment. The drones were exploiting both physics and logic. Because of Earth's curvature, they were flying below the minimum line of sight for the S-400's primary radar, literally hiding behind the horizon. Simultaneously, they were exploiting the system's own intelligence with GPS spoofing, actively lying to Russian sensors, and confirming the assumption that they were harmless wildlife. Back in the mobile command post, the operator could see the entire battlefield with perfect clarity. He watched as Russian radar continued to ignore his strike force, while the Pantsir wasted ammunition firing at empty sky. From his hidden position, he had achieved information dominance. Russia's $500 million defense network had been outsmarted by what amounted to hobbyist-grade equipment. At 5 minutes past 2, everything that had gone perfectly began to fall apart. The first problem emerged as a direct consequence of their own success. The decoy drone destroyed by the Pantsir hadn't simply vanished. Its wreckage, a burning mass of lithium-ion battery cells and molten polymer components, plummeted into a dried cornfield below. The autumn vegetation ignited immediately, producing thick black smoke that the prevailing wind pushed directly across the flight path of the approaching attack drones. For the pilot controlling the second attack drone, his crystal-clear night vision feed suddenly became an impenetrable swirling darkness. He was effectively blind, his low-altitude advantage sabotaged by the burning remains of his own decoy aircraft. As the drone instinctively climbed a few meters to escape the smoke, it briefly broke above the horizon line. For just a moment, it became visible to a different Russian system, the Podlet K-1, a specialized low-altitude radar designed specifically to fill the gaps in S-400 coverage. The Podlet didn't hesitate. It immediately broadcast a high-intensity jamming signal across a broad spectrum, from 2 GHz to 18 GHz. This wasn't sophisticated electronic warfare. It was brute force, an electronic sledgehammer designed to sever wireless communications. The effect was instantaneous. Inside the KAMAZ truck, 2 of the 4 attack drone video feeds flickered and died, replaced by static. The wireless control link had been cut. The operator cursed as half his strike force was electronically decapitated. And then the situation deteriorated further. The Pantsir system, no longer distracted by the main decoy group, acquired a solid lock on the third attack drone, the one that had climbed out of the smoke. A missile streaked from its launcher with perfect tracking. This time, there was no miss. The drone disintegrated in a distant fireball. 3 of the 4 attack drones were now out of action. The entire operation, months of intelligence work and planning, now rested on a single $400 aircraft. But this is where Ukraine revealed its ace. The last remaining drone, which had been operating on wireless control, suddenly deployed a nearly invisible fiber optic cable from a microspool beneath its frame. The cable, thinner than a human hair, was capable of transmitting 1.5 gigabits of uncompressed video and control data per second. Electronic warfare can jam radio frequencies and spoof GPS coordinates, but it cannot interfere with a beam of light traveling through a glass filament. The Russian jamming system was now attacking a target that no longer existed on the electromagnetic spectrum. The connection reestablished instantly, perfectly stable, and completely undetectable by conventional means. To Russian operators, the drone remained invisible. To the Ukrainian controller, it had become a hardwired extension of his own decision-making. He was no longer flying a drone. He had become a participant in the most consequential first-person video game in modern warfare. The aircraft, now under direct, unjammable control, dove back into the cornfield, using the tall vegetation as concealment. The intelligence data was clear and unambiguous. The pipeline was at peak pressure, a massive reservoir of explosive potential waiting for a trigger. And his drone was now that trigger. At 7 minutes past 2, with the fiber optic link secure, the final 100 meters became a masterclass in precision. The drone emerged from the cornfield into a clearing, and there before it stood the target, 3 massive steel pipes converging at a junction point, the beating heart of the Koltsevoy network. The pipes vibrated under immense internal pressure, 1,000 pounds per square inch of volatile jet fuel. The target was specific: the central pressure valve, a complex assembly of steel and rivets where the 3 pipelines met. The operator took a steadying breath and spoke into his microphone, final approach authorized, as much for the operational log as for himself. He pushed the controls forward, committing the drone to its terminal run. But at that exact moment, his world split into 2 separate realities. On his screen, the pipeline rushed forward in deadly silence. Through the armored rear window of the KAMAZ truck, a new and immediate threat materialized. Headlights cut through the forest darkness, followed by more, and then the unmistakable profile of a mobile Pantsir unit, closing rapidly. They were 800 meters out, and accelerating. The operation had been compromised. The operator shouted the command for Phase 3, emergency extraction. The KAMAZ engine roared to life, the heavy truck lurching forward onto a muddy forest track, never designed for high-speed pursuit. Driving a 10-ton vehicle at nearly 100 kilometers per hour on unpaved terrain was a desperate gamble, but there was no alternative. As the truck fishtailed through turns, the operator activated their final defensive measure, a GPS spoofer that had been held in reserve for exactly this scenario. To the Russian command network, the KAMAZ truck didn't just disappear from tracking, it teleported. Its icon now transmitting from the city of Tula, 120 miles to the south. Behind them, the pursuing Pantsir opened fire with its 30mm cannons. Tracer rounds tore through the night, but they weren't aimed at the truck's actual position. They were aimed at its last known coordinates, ripping harmlessly through pine trees in the Bryansk forest. The operator, monitoring a rear-view camera, allowed himself a brief, adrenaline-fueled laugh. While his team executed their frantic escape, his attention remained locked on the drone's video feed. The aircraft was now on a perfect, irreversible trajectory toward the valve assembly. At the pipeline itself, the scene had descended into total chaos. Russian security personnel, finally understanding that the threat was not airborne but at ground level, ran in confused circles without clear orders. High above, the S-400 system, still completely blind to the real danger, continued launching million-dollar interceptors at the ghosts of the decoy swarm. The drone's display showed a countdown timer. 10 seconds remaining. The Kamaz slammed to a halt at a prearranged depot. The team bailed out and sprinted toward waiting civilian vehicles. The last man out tossed a thermite grenade into the cab, a final act of operational security to reduce their multi-million-dollar mobile command center to molten slag and deny any intelligence value to the enemy. Inside the getaway car, now speeding away from the forest, the operator watched the feed on a ruggedized tablet. His heart rate had climbed to 120 beats per minute. The drone was now just meters away. The camera feed was so detailed, he could see individual rivets on the steel valve casing, could see where freezing air had formed crystals on the metal surface. The last image he saw was the reflection of his own drone's approach sensor in the curved steel of the pipe. Then the screen went black. At 8 minutes past 2, the operator transmitted his final command. A single word: release. The last FPV drone, now just 1 kilogram of carbon fiber and electronics, screamed toward impact at 140 miles per hour. Its onboard AI guidance system was locked onto the precise GPS coordinates of the central pressure valve, a target no larger than a dinner plate. The autumn wind, which might have deflected a less sophisticated system, was actually used by the drone's micro-adjusting control surfaces to add a final burst of velocity. The impact was not a collision, but a surgical strike. The half-kilogram shaped charge on its nose penetrated the 1-inch anti-drone mesh like paper, then pierced the half-inch steel casing of the pipe itself, exactly 6 inches from the main valve assembly. The explosive didn't just detonate, it unleashed a chain reaction that would be studied in military academies for decades. The fuse was programmed with a precise 0.8-second delay, and that timing was critical. The target wasn't the pipeline's exterior, it was the pressurized fuel inside. At 1,000 pounds per square inch, the energy from the explosive charge was instantly trapped within the 3 converging steel pipes. With no place to vent, the pressure wave became a trapped demon, rebounding off interior walls and multiplying its own destructive force with each reflection. The pipeline suffered a catastrophic, instantaneous failure. The shockwave shattered the main valve and tore apart half-inch thick steel welds as if they were tissue paper. The ground heaved upward, and a crater 100 feet wide opened up, swallowing a nearby guard bunker whole. A geyser of atomized jet fuel ignited into a fireball that vaporized underground power and communications lines. The facility's entire nervous system died in an instant. The human cost was immediate and severe. 12 Russian reserve guards in the surrounding structures were killed. Within minutes, FSB security services established a hard lockdown on the entire Ramensky district. Official denials and misinformation began immediately, but the physical evidence was already scattering across the landscape. Drone debris landed in the nearby town of Zhukovsky, causing an 8-hour power outage that affected thousands of civilians. 4 hours later, an American reconnaissance satellite captured 12 high-resolution frames of the aftermath. The 100-foot crater matched the predictive model generated by Ukrainian AI systems with chilling precision. The mission was confirmed successful. But the collapse wasn't limited to the immediate blast site. It was a systemic hemorrhage that spread through the entire Russian military supply network. Inside the Transneft control center in Moscow, technicians stared at their monitoring systems in disbelief as 7 million tons of fuel simply vanished from the grid. Pressure gauges across 3 districts flatlined simultaneously. The pipeline's heart had stopped beating. This digital silence was the first symptom of a paralysis that quickly reached frontline units. Su-35 fighter aircraft were the first to feel the impact, as scheduled sorties were cancelled due to fuel shortages. Then armored divisions began to grind to a halt. An estimated 1,000 T-90 main battle tanks suddenly found themselves operating on borrowed time with dwindling fuel reserves. The paralysis spread backward through the supply chain. Fuel convoys from the Ryazan refinery sat motionless on highways, their drivers waiting for orders and destination coordinates that would never arrive. This created a 72-hour command vacuum, a window of pure opportunity that Ukraine exploited with brutal efficiency. Ukrainian forces launched coordinated counterattacks across 5 different fronts against an enemy that was suddenly operating blind and running on emergency reserves. The shockwave didn't stop at the military level. It slammed directly into the Kremlin, triggering a wave of paranoia through the highest levels of Russian leadership. Questions were raised about penetration of security protocols and the reliability of defense systems that had cost billions to deploy. On the domestic front, the price of gasoline jumped 15% overnight, a tremor that every Russian citizen could feel directly in their wallet, the first ripple of an economic earthquake that would continue for months. A $4,800 operation had just inflicted strategic damage measurable in billions, and demonstrated that in modern warfare, intelligence and precision can overcome almost any advantage in raw military spending. This has been tonight's deep examination of Operation Serpent's Head, a mission that redefined the calculus of asymmetric warfare. Thank you for watching.